Hi, this is Marcus Motley. In this episode of my continuing video series on emotional intelligence and emotional competence, I'm highlighting 5 emotional competencies that we should all embrace and that we should all get very good at. The first one, of course, is self-awareness, and we covered this in a previous video. Because self-awareness is the cornerstone, the foundation, the most important thing, the number one thing that we should consider, because it supports all the other emotional competencies. Without self-awareness, our emotions can push us to do things that we really don't want to do, or become people that we don't want to be, or to be seen as people who we don't want to be seen as. And so when we are aware of our feelings, we can choose how we want to act or react in a given situation or with a specific person. Now, here are some self-awareness tips. Focus on developing your awareness of your emotions by examining them very closely. In other words, at the end of the day, or at the end of a very stressful situation, or at the end of an emotional outburst or an emotionally taxing situation, sit back and reflect on the emotions that were driving you. Sit back and reflect on how you handled those emotions. Sit back and reflect on how those emotions influence your thinking and your acting. Learn to tune into your emotions because they can give you valid information about why you act and react, about how you act and react, and about the links between your actions, your thoughts, and your feelings. Recognize the importance of emotions, even if you are a technical person who works in a technical field, and even if you work independently of others. So, for example, I've worked as a coach with engineers who are out in the field and not necessarily communicating a lot of times with people, and so they don't think that they have to develop their emotional intelligence or the emotional competence because they are not interacting with people as others do. Well, the thing about it is that their emotions do drive them. It does drive their decision making. It does drive their communication, even if they're only communicating by email. So it's important to recognize the power and importance of your emotions, no matter what your field is. The second factor is self-regulation. Self-regulation is about recognizing our emotions and moderating our responses so that we are able to reason and perform well. When we are very emotional, we do not make good decisions and often react inappropriately or quite differently from how we would normally respond or how we would have loved to respond. In other words, we often lose our normal perspective when we react emotionally. Conversely, when we learn to manage our emotions well, we become masters of mood management. And the issue of mood, the term mood is not one that we normally use and associate with emotional intelligence. But in essence, that's what it is we're talking about. We're talking about mood regulation. When we have good control of that, we're able to manage stress and communicate more constructively and consistently. We're able to be strategic in our communications, in our decision making, and in our actions. As a result, we appear more level-headed, and other people see us as trustworthy and as responsible and accountable leaders, supervisors, staff members, technicians, etc. Here are some self-regulation tips. Accept responsibility for choosing your own emotions. In other words, be accountable for your own emotions. Do not blame others for the emotions that are running through you. And certainly don't blame others for your reactions to those emotions. In other words, don't blame others for the actions that emerge as a result of your emotions. Learn how to reframe stressful situations into ones that are challenging and that you can and will respond to effectively. In other words, a stressful situation, a stressor, is a challenge. And it is a challenge that you need to respond to. I've often said that I don't teach stress management. I teach stress response management. In other words, it's how you respond to the stressor rather than trying to manage the stressor yourself. In a lot of jobs, you don't have the ability, the power to influence the stressor. What you do have power with, what all of us have power to do, is to respond appropriately to the various stressors in our lives. Be aware of and learn to respond to your own emotional triggers. Well, first of all, you have to know what the triggers are. You have to be sensitive to when you are being triggered. You have to be sensitive to the reactions that you have when you're triggered and the outcome and results of those triggers. And then you have to learn to understand that when you're triggered, you have to choose how you respond. Develop a step-by-step plan on what you will do when you are triggered emotionally. And this will take a lot of thought. This is hard work. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Dealing with triggers, emotional triggers, is hard work. And it is time well spent, however, when you dig in and practice learning to self-regulate when it comes to emotions. The third factor is self-motivation. Now, once we are aware of our emotions and have learned ways to manage them and have developed a step-by-step process to deal with them, the third step is to direct the power of our emotions towards a purpose and a goal which will motivate and inspire us. People who are highly motivated understand that every job or task may have its less enjoyable features, but they persist anyway, and they plow ahead. They keep going. They don't stop. They keep moving. They envision reaching their goals, which gives meaning to their efforts. These people accept change and are more flexible. They have better attitudes and take more initiative. And most importantly, self-motivated people persist and persevere towards their goals despite facing stresses and obstacles and setbacks. Here are some self-motivation tips. Recognize that emotions affect performance and productivity. In other words, your level of motivation can affect the way you behave and the way you act. Identify your style at handling setbacks. Identify your style at handling obstacles. Identify the way you handle challenges. Resist asking yourself, what's wrong with me? Or what's wrong with them? Instead, ask, what can I do? How can I fix this? How should I move forward? What steps can I take next in order to deal with this situation effectively? Work towards achieving a state of flow. In other words, moving and working continuously towards the goal, and do so until you achieve it. 4. Empathy. Once we have become more aware of and intentional with our emotions, it is time to consider those of other people. Empathy is about learning to see things from another person's perspective and to understand their emotions from their perspective so that we can relate to them better. Here are some empathy tips. Practice recognizing and then responding appropriately to other people's emotions. Put your perspectives and emotions aside as you consider those of other people. In other words, a lot of people say, well, empathy is about putting yourself in the place of somebody else. Well, the problem with that is that a lot of times we don't do that well because we carry much of ourselves over there when we start considering them. Putting yourself in somebody else's shoes is a popular statement. The problem with that is that we have to take off our own shoes before we try to put our feet in their shoes. So put your perspectives and emotions aside as you consider the perspectives and emotions and feelings and thoughts and behaviors and history of other people. Empathy is not about agreeing with others, but it's about respecting how they feel. It is about seeing their world and their experiences through their lenses. And the fifth factor is effective interpersonal relationships. Mastering the abilities of self-awareness, self-regulation, self-motivation, and empathy paves the way for developing greater skills in handling relationships. It is not enough that we simply be intelligent about our emotions. In order to be effective with family members, friends, co-workers, and those we supervise, we must bring the four previous skills together to become socially intelligent and competent. This fifth competency, effective interpersonal relationships, is about effectively interacting with people and being adept at managing emotions in others to bring about higher levels of collaboration, cooperation, and teamwork. It is also about having mutually satisfying relationships at work, in the community, and at home. Here are some tips for interpersonal relationships. Use all your emotional competencies, awareness, regulation, motivation, and empathy, to influence and persuade others for positive and purposeful and goal-oriented actions. Build consensus and support for ideas and goals. Motivate and inspire yourselves and others to achieve those goals. And develop the ability to uplift others and keep them motivated. So these are 5 emotional competencies. And I want to focus on the word competencies because competencies have to do with abilities and skills. These are not thoughts, these are not ideas, these are skills. In other words, you can develop those skills. These 5 competencies are competencies that you can develop and you will need to develop if you intend to move towards higher and higher levels of emotional intelligence and emotional competence.